Hello fellow sim racers. I haven't made one of these discussion starter videos in a little while, and I've been thinking a lot recently about different approaches to practice and how they apply to sim racing. So, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the approach I take, and hopefully we can get a discussion going on in the comments, and maybe we can all come out of the other side with a few ideas to try out. First of all, I can't take full credit for this video. While I had been planning on making a video on the subject, regular viewer and commenter Ted Duncan opened up a thought-provoking thread on Race Department over the weekend, which I advise that anyone that's even remotely interested in the subject should check out. Naturally, there's a link in the description. What's interesting is that Ted compares his methodology for practicing his sim racing craft with that which he employed when learning to play the guitar, which is exactly how I was planning on approaching the topic. I don't think it's controversial to suggest that practice is essential if you want to be proficient at any skill, but getting the most out of practice is a skill in and of itself. If you're learning to play tennis, to master the oboe, or to perform keyhole surgery, you would generally enlist the help of a dedicated teacher or coach. But since you can't take sim racing lessons down at your local night school, sim racers have to be their own coach, and that's why I think this subject is more important than a lot of us think. Now, it's pretty tempting to go down the theoretical rabbit hole here, but I think it'd probably be a more interesting video for everyone if I spend a bit of time talking about my approach, and then we can get on to the discussion. For me, effective practice involves 3 steps: planning, performing, and feedback. First of all, for me, it's essential to have a practice plan. It's all too easy to just jump in the rig, turn a bunch of laps, and then reward yourself with a nice cold beer when you're done. And if you drive enough laps, you'll probably improve a little bit, but I wouldn't call it effective. So I go into a practice session with a specific goal. To start with, that may be simple, like learn the racing line for a new circuit. But as you receive feedback, you can start to flesh out that plan. And learn the racing line morphs into work on entry to turn 4 or braking for turn 7. This is something we all do subconsciously, but when you work on these things in a more active sense, they tend to improve quicker. In theory, the performing bit's the easy part. Once you've got a plan, go out and follow it. But in addition to any part of the plan, I like to make sure I form good habits while doing so. For example, I always enter and exit the pits at racing speed, and use the pit limiter properly. And I like to practice non-racing things like navigating the black box and other stuff that may crop up during the race. Next up is feedback. Because most of us don't have a coach, we have to rely on the definitely not at all biased messages that we're given by our brains. But we don't just have to rely on memory. I'm a huge fan of recording practice and watching it back from different angles, and that's what the footage is for this video. I'm working on my race pace for the iRacing Ferrari Challenge race at Zolder this week. And by watching back the footage, I can quite easily see a few places where I'm giving up time. I could get closer to the apex here, use more room on the apex there, or be more aggressive with the curb at turn 7, for example. So all that gets fed into the practice plan for next time. I also like to move the camera around and really take a look at how the car's behaving under certain conditions. You can visually see how the car reacts to your steering and pedal inputs, which can be very useful when you're learning to transfer weight more smoothly, and in particular when you're working on setups. Which leads me to my final point, which is all about note-taking. I'm a relentless note taker. The very act of writing things down helps me to remember them. And while I don't keep detailed time charts and the like, I do like to make notes that will hopefully inform my practice plan for next time, and ultimately lead to better performance in the long run. Here are my notes for the practice sessions I've undertaken for the race at Zolder this week to show you what I mean. Like Ted, I'm also a musician, and have taught myself to play a fair number of instruments over the years. And in that process, I've picked up a number of tips that I think are pretty applicable to sim racing. First of all, practice has to be regular, but it doesn't necessarily have to be long. When I taught myself to play the piano and keyboard a couple of years ago, I found that 20 minutes of practice every day was far more effective than longer sessions spread out over time. I believe that this is especially true in the early stages of learning, when your brain is being inundated with lots of new information. Don't get me wrong, longer practice sessions have their benefits, but not at the cost of frequency. Next up, deliberate practice is best undertaken when you're alert and well rested. Ted touches on this in his thread with the suggestion of taking regular breaks, because tiredness leads to mistakes, which in turn lead to rage quitting. And finally, straight from the world of music is the idea of warming up with a couple of gentle laps before you jump into the deep learning. That way you're relaxed and comfortable before you start getting your mind focused on deliberate practice. And that just about sums up my feelings on sim racing practice. So over to you guys. How do you go about improving your craft as a sim racer? Do you undertake deliberate and structured practice, or do you take a more carefree approach? That is, if you practice at all. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, then it would be great if you could hit the like button and subscribe to my channel. And if you think the video will be helpful for others, then please consider sharing it. As always, thank you for donating your precious free time by watching. It is very much appreciated. So all that's left to say is goodbye, thank you for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day.